QuickBooks Online 2025 Customized Report. Get ready and some coffee because we're learning how to save time with QuickBooks Online 2025. Here we are online in our browser searching for that QuickBooks Online test drive, the free sample company file available to everybody, looking for the result that has Intuit.com and the URL because Intuit is the owner of QuickBooks. We're going to be choosing the United States version of the software. We will verify that we are not a robot because if we are a robot, they won't let us in. So we have to verify that. I'm going to go to the prior tab, close that up. It's no longer necessary. We're in the sample company file, Craig's Design, Landscaping Services, opening the major financial statement reports, balance sheet, income statement. Those are them, as we do every time. The reports are on the left-hand side. We're in the reports, standard tab, favorites, right-clicking on the balance sheet to open a link in a new tab, right-clicking the P&L, the profit and loss, otherwise known as the income statement, opening it in a new tab. Let's go to that middle tab, standard process. The hamburger needs to be closed. The top bun is being placed on the burger so it's ready to go and we've got more space on our plate. Let's do the range change up top, 010124 tab 123125, and select the drop down to see it in years as has been our custom. Run it to refresh it, 24, 25 side by side, tabbing up to the right, closing the ham boogie again. And that change, you know, it needs to be the same. 010124 tab 123125 tab. See it in years, por favor. Run it to refresh it, 24, 25 side by side. Intuit has been changing a little bit of the data in 2025 as we move further into 2025, but we're still refreshing our browser, opening in incognito window, which we recommend you do the same so that we basically remove any prior presentation transactions and have as close to a clean slate and the same data as possible as we go forward. Let's go back to the balance sheet. We've been taking a look at the formatting of the reports, and that's going to be up top in the ribbon, noting that we have the classic view and we have the modern view, which QuickBooks is basically kind of A/B testing right now, remembering that it's not really changing any actual functionality typically, but giving us a different look and feel. So we'll try to toggle back and forth between the two of them as QuickBooks decides which one they're going to land on ultimately. So we have our information here, which we're looking at from the perspective of a balance sheet. Remembering, however, that any report will have similar options oftentimes, but there might be some changes in the functionality in part due to, are we talking about a report that is as of a point in time, as we see with the balance sheet, or is it a time range performance report needing a beginning and ending within the report? That will change the look and feel of some of the functionality, so keep that in mind as we continue going forward. Back on over to the balance sheet. Let's switch it to the modern view. And so in the modern view, we have a little bit more clean layout up top. In essence, I believe they've kind of removed some of the duplicate items that were in the past in this area, as well as in the kind of general information. So we looked at this stuff in the ribbon up top. Now we're going to go into the general options for the added items. So in the general options, we've got the general options here, the number format, and then you have these little triangles for the toggle, number format, show non-zero or active, header, and then the footer. Let's go into each of these. So in the number format, we've got divide by 1,000. Now, if you're a small business, you might not need to do that, but if you're a business that has like millions in dollar amounts, then you might divide by 1,000, removing some of the zeros, remembering the general idea here being that we want to report something that's going to help us with decision-making processes. And if we're talking about millions of dollars, then the 5 here representing 500 might not be that relevant to us. It's a rounding difference in essence for big decision-making. Therefore, we could say divide it by 1,000 and it removes that. So this is going to be 1.56 that we can multiply times 1,000 to get to the actual number, a little bit cleaner and easier to see if we're talking about big numbers. Let's remove that one. Don't show zero amounts. Now, there's kind of an issue with the zeros that are going to be in place because you might, for example, want to see the zeros to see all of the accounts and or to see activity in active accounts. Now, you can see down here that, so if, let me uncheck this, for example. So now we can basically see these zero amounts here. Now, for external reporting purposes, let me do it on just 1 year. Let's go from 0101 to 013124 to get a better idea of this. So December through, okay. And now we've got a bunch of zeros. Actually, I want to go through the end of the year. Let's do 123124. Like, what happened here? So, okay, so now it's showing zero amounts. For example, here we have a zero amount. Here's a zero amount. Now, normally you wouldn't want those for external reporting purposes because there's no activity in them. But for internal reporting, you might want to see all of the accounts that are impacted. And if there is something going on within that account, you might want to drill down on it. For example, clicking on it to give you the transaction detailed information. So if you're talking in particular about like clearing accounts, like undeposited funds, it's likely that they're going to be zero, but there might have been activity in that account during that time frame. Therefore, for internal reporting purposes, we might want to see those zeros so I can drill down on them and look at the detail and the GL activity within them that has happened, even though it has a zero balance. Let's go back in here. And let's go back. The default was to don't show round amounts to the nearest whole currency amount. So this is basically removing the pennies. Now, it used to say remove cents, but notice this is a little bit more specific because if I round this, you can see the pennies will be taken off. So that's going to make it a little bit cleaner to look at. Once again, for external reporting, even for internal reporting, that might be a little bit nicer on the eyes. One reason I think they changed it from like removing cents is that if you had, for example, I'm going to uncheck that. If you had the divide by 1,000 on, notice that now it's giving you a decimal, but that decimal doesn't represent pennies, right? It's going to be representing the decimal place after you divide by 1,000, right? So that means that this rounding number will take off. It'll go to the nearest like whole number after dividing over here. So it's possible that you want to divide by 1,000, keep the decimal in place, or possibly divide by 1,000 and remove the decimal, or you don't divide by 1,000, in which case this one will remove the pennies. All right, what else we got? We've got the negative numbers being represented with a negative. So I don't think we have any negative numbers here. Sometimes there's one, well, so you might have a negative number, for example, on the balance sheet if there was like a contra asset account, typically depreciation or accumulated depreciation. So we can represent that with a negative in there, or we can represent it with a negative behind it, which isn't normal in the United States, but might be more custom in other areas. I kind of like to have the brackets around it so that if you had a negative number like accumulated depreciation in the asset area, it's going to show that negative with brackets around it. And you can also show in red. So if you had a negative number, now it's going to be a red number with brackets to kind of emphasize more detail on that negative. So to me, the brackets might be the red might be a little bit of an overkill, although that could be useful, particularly if you're talking like at an income statement or performance report. Let's do the same thing here just to get an idea. Let's switch this one and let's go to this item and say we want to show negative numbers with brackets and make it red. So now you can clearly, distinctly see that negative number here. That also might be useful, of course, when you're looking at a comparative type of report that we looked at before. So you might say that we want to compare this to like the previous year. Let's say this is going to be compare to the previous year, but there is no previous year. Let's go from 2025 to 12/31/25, and then we have a previous year. And then we could say take a look at the dollar change, and notice that's going to give us substantial negative numbers that might stand out a bit more if we make them red. And I kind of like the brackets as opposed to just a negative personally. All right, so that's going to be those ones. And then those are in the number formatting. Notice what we didn't have there was different font styles and whatnot, which you could get if you export to Excel and then do a little other touch-ups in terms of numbers and colors other than red for text, as well as possible cells. Then we have show rows. So we have active, non-zero, and all. So the default is the active items. Now this gets back to this idea of showing zeros. So notice here we're showing only the ones that have activity in them. So up top we said that we want to don't show the zero amounts. I'm going to go ahead and show the zero amounts now. So now we're going to have zeros that are displayed. But for example, this one is 0. It's displayed and it's active. So it's not showing all of the zeros that aren't active. So if I was to say and make this all items, now it's going to show all of the zeros, meaning if I went to my general ledger over here and I went to my sales and I went to my, not the sales, transaction tab, come on, and in the chart of accounts. So remember that QuickBooks by default gives us this massive chart of accounts. So there's going to be a lot of accounts we don't use if we don't clean up that chart of accounts, which might be okay, but it's a little bit. But then if I go over here and I say I want to show all of the zero numbers, all of them, not just the active ones, it's going to give us all those numbers in the chart of accounts, which might be useful in some cases, but is typically an overkill. That's not usually what you want to do. For external reporting purposes, you possibly want to get rid of the zeros. So show the non-zero items. But for internal reporting purposes, once again, you might want to show the zeros that have activity, because there's going to be things like, for example, the undeposited funds, which oftentimes might have a 0 in it, but you want to show the activity so that when you drill down on it, you can see the activity. So I want that account to show up because there's some activity that has happened in it, so I can drill down on the transaction detail. That's why the activity button is basically the default. That'll be your reports normally will show zeros, and you're going to go, why does it show that 0 and not the other GL accounts that have 0 balances? Why? Because it's showing the ones that have active activity in it, allowing you to drill down on it. What if you don't want to show any zeros on your financial statement for external reporting purposes? Then you could say don't show the zeros here, remove the zeros, and then you can save that report, customize it possibly, save it as a customized report so that you can then keep that option possibly for external reporting versus internal reporting. Similarly with columns, although sometimes you don't have all of the columns, it depends on the type of report that we have. All right, let's close this up. Let's close this up, and now let's go into the headers. So we have the company logo, so we can add a company logo here within the header, or we can remove the company logo. So we have a little bit of customization capability. Report period. So if I remove the report period, it's going to take off this line item. Now, why would that be useful? Sometimes, remember, when I create a default report, what's going to happen is we have a balance sheet which is typically reported as of a point in time. Notice it says as of December 31st, 2025. That's because it's as of a point in time. But what if I now add the prior year? Now it's not really as of 2025. It's got 2024 and 2025, or 2025 and 2024, which means this sub-report this sub-period, report period might no longer be good. It'll be confusing possibly. Possibly we want to remove it and just use the period dates down here. So, and then we have the company name. So we can click off the company name. So maybe we could say, hey, look, the company name is taking up too much space or something like that. We already know what company it is because it's my company file, possibly. And so we could remove the company name. If you're working internally, then that could be useful possibly just to save as much space as possible so you have less scrolling down activity. But by default, that will be on, of course. And then we have the alignment. So within the alignment, you've got the left align, which is just going to move it on this side. You've got the center, which is the default, and then the right align, which will move this bit on this side. Notice it's kind of, so usually it's going to be centered. So that gives you a little bit of customization, not a whole lot of customization. If you want more customization, you can export it to Excel and then have a whole bunch of options that you can customize with, but you can't save those every time. They won't be generated automatically, as can be done with these customized options, which then you can save the report options, possibly making it easy to get to those reports every time you want to. Let's go into the footer. So within the footer, we've got the date prepared. So that's going to be down here. So we have the date prepared. So maybe you don't want that. Oftentimes I would think maybe that might not be necessary, as well as the time down below, time prepared. Maybe you remove those from the footer. By default, they're in place. So oftentimes I might remove those. The footer alignment similarly can be left aligned, center. So if we go down to the footer, left aligned, center, and right aligned. So there we have that. And by default, it's going to be in the center. So those are going to be the general items on this side. Let's take a quick look within the classic view. By the way, you could move this whole thing up with this little triangle just to give you some more real estate. That's pretty cool too, because if you might want to have more information on one screen. So let's make this larger. Let's just go back to the classic view, the classics, and just to get an idea. So we had the options here where we had the drop down here, which is a little different. We had this is where it shows us the activity that we saw, the 0 and non-zero. So it's here and it's in the customized, which was duplicated in the classic view. And then we've got the periods over here with the previous period, the comparative reports, and the cash versus accrual toggle, the collapse, the sort, and so on, those items here. Then we could go into the customize where there was some duplicates. So now it looks like this. In the general, it had the custom dates and whatnot again, which is a duplicate of what it had over here. This is why they might be trying to change it, because they had some redundancy, which I don't think was really necessary. They've got the cash and accrual toggle, which was also over here. So again, that's somewhat redundant. And then you've got the divide by 1,000 that we saw before, the without cents, which they changed to being to the closest whole number. And that's because if you divide by 1,000, then it's not talking about cents, it's talking about the next whole number. So we have that one. Except zero amounts. So that's with the zero amounts, we've got the negative numbers bracketed and show them as red with a toggle like this time. And then I'll close that up. Close this one. We've got the rows. So this gives us the years and whatnot. And this gives us the active. Notice the years were over here before. So that's redundant. And then here's where that active versus unactive and stuff was, which, and the old version also was over here, I believe, right here. So once again, this whole bit was redundant. And then we have the filter. So here's where the filtering options are in this format. So by default, it's already filtered to a balance sheet report, remembering that the filters are something that we'll typically use most commonly in the transaction detail, drilling down into the checking account and then filtering. And this is the classic version of the filters. So it's going to give you the, this is the filtering options by customer. It won't, let me click off of this. Click off of that. Customer, vendor, and product. And then we can filter within each of those items. And then in the header and footer, we've got the show logo up top. So if we want the company logo, company name, this is checking it off. If I uncheck it, it would remove the company name. And of course we can then we could actually adjust the company name. That's a little bit redundant as well, because I could change it by just clicking in here and changing it. So then we got the report title, so the balance sheet, which once again is a little bit redundant because I could click in here and change the text. And then we've got the report period, so that would remove the report period that we saw before. And then we've got the date prepared, time prepared. That's removing the footers that we looked at. The new format is a little bit nicer because you can see the header and footer even if you're not in the page preview mode, which is kind of nice so that you can kind of see what's happening with these two while you're looking at the options. And then you've got the report basis. So it's going to say that it's on the accrual or cash basis. And then you can center and so on the alignment. So that's going to be where these options are here. You also have the customize button here. Wait a sec. You've got the save customization. And that's going to be useful because once you make any changes to the report, you can save the customization. And then, so if I save the customization, it's going to be a balance sheet. Let's say balance sheet 1, for example. And then I can add it to maybe a group. So I might say that I'm going to make a group name of just group 1. And then I'll add that group, which will put it in the drop down here. So I'm going to put it into that group. It didn't add the 1, but group. And then share with, I could share it with other people if there are multiple users and I want to share the report, but I'm just going to save it here. And then when I go into the first tab, let's go to the first tab. Let's go into the reports. And then usually we go into the standard tab, but I could go into the custom reports where now we have our custom balance sheet, which has been altered. So if I go into the custom balance sheet, now it's already going to have this comparative reports that we have put in play. So that could be really useful. One of the ways we might use that, as we'll take a look at in future presentations, is to say, I want to have some reports that are customized for my internal use, possibly taking off the pennies or something like that. Or maybe I like to have negative numbers. Maybe I want to see the zeros that have activity in them for my internal reports. And then for the external reports, which I give to clients, maybe then I round the numbers and don't show the pennies to make it a little bit cleaner for them on the eyes, possibly. Maybe I then remove the zeros, even if they're active, so that they don't have any zero balances on their sheets and so on and so forth. Maybe I change the name up top. Maybe I add my logo for the external reports, but not to the internal reports. So that's going to be useful for us to do that customization, remembering that I could always do further customization. Notice that you don't have things like fonts. You don't have a lot of options on fonts. You don't have a lot of options on different color schemes, different kind of indentation schemes, and so on and so forth, which you could do and to your heart's desire in Excel. But if you export it to Excel and then further customize it, you would have to do that every time, as opposed to the adjustments made in here, which you can then save the customizations and open directly to those customized reports every time. So again, you might do a little bit of touch-up work in Excel sometimes on certain reports, which again could give you just a little bit, would give you an extreme differentiation between other QuickBooks users, because they wouldn't be using any simple font functionality or anything like that, although the report formatting is different in Excel. So we'll export to Excel later and we'll explore those different options later.